Imagine for a moment that you are a crazy parkour billionaire and you have enough money to open a secret laboratory where you plan to perform human experiments. And the goal of your lab is to find the absolute limits of parkour skill and to develop as many new tricks as possible. And because you are an evil billionaire, you set up your experiments in a way that you don't care if your test subjects get injured or even worse. So in the end, you have humans jump from increasingly higher and higher levels to find out just how much impact the human body can take. Heck, why not find out how much a human can take landing on his back? Or in a handstand? How many flips could a human do from a 7-story building? What actually would happen if you come short on a massive roof gap? What about a solitary confinement experiment, where you take a parkour athlete and lock him up in a room with just a slanted wall for 10 hours a day for a whole week straight, and you see how many tricks that athlete can come up with out of sheer boredom. As crazy as this sounds, in the years between 2005 and 2015, this is what seems to me was happening in Russia. The European side of the parkour universe was both in shock and awe with every new parkour video that came out of Russia, in what I now refer to as the golden era of Russian parkour. A whole country effectively became the research lab for the parkour world, taking any new trick idea and stretching it to its ultimate limit, while also coming up with completely original ideas almost weekly. After this era, parkour was forever changed. Limits had been redefined, double flips went from being a hard trick to being the new standard, and whole styles of parkour had been invented. And to me, the stories and people behind the tricks are often more interesting than the tricks themselves. But I'm afraid they're being lost in time and the depths of the interwebs. With this golden era being 10 years in the past, even the people who I talk to and who lived through it are starting to forget what exactly happened. As somebody who was captivated by the madness and skill, I want to document this era for future generations. So I rewatched hundreds of videos, sifted through channels that have been inactive for over 10 years, interviewed some of my Russian parkour friends who witnessed or even performed the feats themselves, so I could give you everything in one place. Of course, some of these moments were viral sensations, and you might have come across them, but a lot of the best stuff never even got popular in the first place. Today I want to bring those moments to your attention using the popular iceberg format. An internet iceberg is a collection of various pieces of information put into a tiered system. The most popular and well-known information at the top, and thus the visible part of the iceberg, and the less known pieces of information further down to the bottom, the portion which you cannot see. Of course, you've probably encountered some of the athletes and clips in the upper tiers, but I will try to give you some background info that you probably didn't know. And eventually, as we descend into the depths of the iceberg, we'll get to stories you likely never heard of, but which are no less interesting. To me, actually more interesting. So sit back, grab a snack, and enjoy. A quick disclaimer, I'll not go super in-depth with each story. This video is meant to be more of an overview. If you want to learn more about any of these stories, let me know by commenting below. The amount of videos I referenced are too many to link them all in my description, but I will overlay athletes or channels or video names with every clip, so you can dig deeper if you like. Lastly, this video is mostly for people who do parkour and want to be inspired by the action and learn about the culture of parkour. However, I will do my best to tell the stories in a way that makes sense to you, even if you never did parkour yourself and are just curious about our world. It's also necessary to mention that not every person featured in this video was born and raised in Russia or even sees themselves as Russian. And some of the videos I'll show might feature Russian athletes but were shot outside of Russia. What unites them is that they were part of the same athletic progression and community which was centered around Russia at the time. So I think it still makes sense to include them in this era of parkour. I'm trying to get as little political as possible here, because I believe in the power parkour has to unite people. And my goal is only to celebrate the athletic achievements and people behind them without picking sides. Tier 1. In this tier, we're going to look at the most well-known Russian parkour facts, which will give us some context for the deeper tiers. Russian clan being the Clan. This is the OG of Russian parkour videos, despite the fact that this video is not from Russia at all. It actually features Oleg Cricket, who lives in the small town of Daugavpils in Latvia, which is about an hour's drive from the Russian border. Nonetheless, this video shaped what most people still associate with Russian parkour today. And that's because it was uploaded under the name Russian Climbing. This video really set the tone of what people still think Russian parkour is like today. Hard but somewhat sketchy action in a setting of Soviet-era blocks, workout parks, and abandoned factories. This video went viral before there even was a YouTube. I remember watching it on Google Video Player, and my friend Pasha started parkour after this video was handed to him on a CD. Imagine going viral in those days. That was so much harder than today. People actually had to take your video, download it, put it on a CD, and then bring it over to your house. Because of this video, Oleg was invited to join Madonna for her music videos and live tour. He later dropped the video out of time, which was another game changer in the world of parkour, because of how he brought dance and rail flow elements into our sport. Oleg Cricket. Yes, we're on the second person as already another Oleg. I think a big part of why the Russian parkour world was so confusing to Europeans trying to make sense of it is because it seems like 90% of all Russians are either named Oleg, Olga, Sergey, Pavel, Alex, or Sasha, which for some reason is the short version of Alex. How does Alex turn into Sasha when you shorten it? Luckily, most of the biggest names in Russian parkour got nicknames eventually. Oleg Cricket was basically the guy who exploited the fact that you can do easy parkour skills next to the edge of a rooftop and get millions of views, when that same trick would not turn any heads when performed on street level. This technique is even more effective if you add a hot girl into the mix. Cricket is actually pretty good at parkour and surprisingly stylish for how tall he is. While Oleg was super viral outside of parkour, he wasn't really relevant inside the parkour scene at the time. He really only made a name for himself once he started going viral. And if anything, Oleg was judged for exploiting parkour to get as many clicks as possible while portraying parkour in a way that really makes it look more dangerous than it is. You gotta give him some credit though. Cricket managed to really find the perfect shooting angles to make things like a simple jump onto a wall look as gut-wrenching as possible. His most famous stunts were actually never performed in Russia but in Dubai, which used to be pretty relaxed security-wise when it came to their rooftops, meaning most of their rooftops were just not locked and you could walk up and open the door and nobody would bother you while you were up there. But Cricket is pretty much solely responsible for Dubai's rooftops being properly locked up today after his clips went so viral that eventually the building owners had to do something about people flocking to their rooftops. Parkour Klan. Despite the name, Parkour Klan was not really an organized team of any sorts. It was more of a compilation YouTube channel run by a character called Arhangel, who we will talk about later, because he's a crazy guy in his own right. Parkour Klan would accept video submissions from all over Russia and even beyond. Arhangel would then pick out the best ones and share them on his Parkour Klan YouTube channel. Most of the parkour world subscribe to Parkour Klan. Take a shot of vodka every time I say the word parkour in this video, because Parkour Klan would regularly post extreme parkour edits you wouldn't find anywhere else. Because of the variety of submissions, you really never knew what you would get when you clicked on one of the videos. Sometimes you would get a banger compilation with fancy editing that somebody had worked on all year. The next day, somebody's gym training, and often what seemed like an average edit, but then surprised you with a crazy send 3 minutes in, just to go back to average clips or a Russian skip afterwards. It was really a crazy mixed bag. As you can see, a lot of these jumps are extremely sketchy or show bad technique, which is why this channel was popular, but more of a running joke in the rest of the parkour world. The stereotype became that in Russia, if your technique was not good enough to land a trick, say you weren't able to make it all the way around on a double backflip, the solution to that problem was not to work on your technique. Don't be silly. Instead, the preferred method in Russia seemed to be to just jump from a higher place until you eventually landed the trick. Personally, I didn't just love the action I got to see on Parkour Klan, but also the raw impressions from small towns across Russia, which sort of gave you a glimpse into what life was like over there. Erik Mukhametshin. When Erik first popped onto the scene, he was instantly recognizable because of his blonde mullet and cocky attitude. Back then, the parkour community subscribed to more of a humble monk, martial artist way of carrying yourself. Anybody who was just a little bit too proud of their skills was labeled a show-off and shunned. Meanwhile, Erik labeled himself a god of freerunning, so it's no surprise he was the target of a lot of hate when he first showed up. You gotta hand it to Erik though, because not just did he deliver the hard tricks Russia was infamous for, but he also had immaculate execution. Erik really challenged and eventually managed to change the stereotype of the sketchy Russian parkour athlete, at least inside the parkour community. You see, back then, double flips were really the hardest tricks anybody would do. For most people, a double flip was the highlight of their edit and required a perfect setup. Along comes Erik, and pretty much every other clip in his video is a double flip. Erik's origin story is actually quite interesting. The dude learned to swim because he wanted to jump off of a bridge into a river. The fact that Erik learned his acrobatics into water still shows in his technique today, especially in how he spots his landing and of course in his air awareness, and how comfortable he is with heights. Because of his skills, a lot of international parkour events started flying out Erik to participate in their freestyle contests. Those contests are usually held side by side with speed competitions. And doing efficient parkour is not what Erik is known for at all. So when Erik said he would compete in speed, you could feel the atmosphere in the room. A lot of the OGs secretly wanted Erik to be humbled. Not just was he a dirty freestyler, he was also cocky about it. If Erik lost, it would be proof that no matter how good you are at acrobatics, you're not going to be strong and useful in an emergency situation. But Erik started winning a bunch of speed competitions as well, so make of that what you want. With all his travels, Erik eventually learned English and the parkour community learned to love Erik. He's still one of the most cocky guys you ever meet, but beneath that, he's a super sweet and caring dude. There's a lot more to say about Erik, but I'm gonna leave it at that for now because we're gonna run into him a few more times as we descend the iceberg. The Moscow Bridge Spot. This location is the most iconic spot in Russian parkour, and I'm asking myself, do I even have to mention that it's seen some insane action over the years? Actually, I will have to save the biggest trick that was ever done here for tier 3 of the iceberg because it's a separate story. But for now, let's just get into why this spot is iconic. I think it's a combination of reasons. First of all, you have to do a climb to access the main area of the spot, so it's hard for police to come and kick you out. Another huge factor is that this spot is covered by the bridge above. As you're probably aware, Russia is not exactly known for its welcoming weather year-round. So it's no surprise that people would prefer a spot that you can train at even during the winter season. And most importantly, the spot is sick. The architecture has the basic elements you need for a solid training session, some mental challenges for athletes on a high level, and unique features that make it stand out. And of course, the fact that this spot is super central in Moscow and easy to reach with public transport does help. With this spot being so popular and also a great place to host parkour jams, it's seen action from the most well-known athletes in the Russian parkour community. And for me as a parkour nerd, it's pretty sick to see how different athletes express themselves with the same setup. I really hope I get to train at this spot in person one day. That would be a dream come true. Outside of this bridge spot, there's not really many iconic spots that come to mind when I think about Russian parkour. However, there is a type of spot that really is unique to Russia and had a huge impact on how Russians do parkour. What I'm talking about is the workout park. The workout park is really a hallmark of Russian parkour. The parks I've seen in Russian parkour videos over the years are absolutely insane, and there's nothing like it in the West. These parks obviously feature bars in various combinations, but another key feature are tires in various shapes and sizes. For parkour, these tires are a popular obstacle because they are a perfect launching pad for all kinds of tricks, and you can use them to practice vaults if they're big enough. And of course in parkour, your environment is a huge influence on what you train and how you move. If you don't have any bars, you can't practice any bar tricks. If all you have is bars, well then, that's what you're gonna do all day. The impact these parks had on the Russian parkour style is obvious and comes out in their creative bar work and also general fitness. Most of my Russian friends have a story to tell about their local workout park that everybody from the neighborhood would go to and work out at, and usually there would be a few guys who could pull off some insane skills. Over the years, Russia and their bar work has been a huge inspiration and influence on the whole world of parkour, with some gyms in the West even rebuilding iconic bar setups in their facilities. Sadly, nowadays most of these parks are not being maintained and are slowly falling apart. And the last person in Tier 1 is Pasha the Boss. A lot of people were surprised when parkour athlete Pasha moved to Los Angeles and married the world's biggest star, Riley Reid. Not me though, because I remember the very first Pasha showreel. It starts with this shot of Pasha gazing at the sunset. Clearly, a man with a dream. And the back of his t-shirt clearly states the target of his ambition. This marriage was not an accident. At the very least, it was fate. But much more likely, Pasha perfectly crafted a master plan, which goes like this. Step 1. Release a parkour compilation that clearly positions you as a creative parkour genius. But people are still full of doubt. Is he the real deal or a one-hit wonder? Step 2. Hit the local sand dunes with your friend Stas and bang out a bunch of game-changing tricks nobody has ever seen before. Now you have everybody's attention, but they're still thinking, if I had a dope sandhill, I could do that shit too. So, on to step 3. Prove everybody wrong by uploading videos using only the most shitty obstacles for parkour imaginable. A shaky bar. Still got next level tricks. A low ass tire. Still innovating. And to finish him off, your hallway? Now, pulling off amazing action in a hallway, that's impressive. And there's no arguing, you are the boss. Step 4 of the master plan is too much to pack in one video, but it definitely involves a hot tub in Santorini and some help from Mickey the Mouse. And step 5, become happily married ever after. Jokes aside, the tricks Pasha invented, his personality, his rise to social media stardom, and crazy story overall could fill an entire book. So I'm going to leave it at this for today. Oh, last interesting fact, Pasha actually grew up in the same small Latvian town as Oleg Cricket, who are also mentioned in this tier. And later on, I'm going to mention his friend Stas, who is also from the same town, and it makes me wonder how a small town in the middle of nowhere gave birth to 3 iconic freerunners. Tier 2. In Tier 2, we are going to focus on the athletes who never really tried to go viral and just put out banger street edits, yet still managed to reach well outside of the parkour community. Shade Zlat. It's hard for me to gauge how well known Shade is outside of the parkour world. He's made an impressive 600 videos and they have collected 12 million views. But I also think half of those views are just from me alone. Out of everybody on this list, Shade is definitely my favorite athlete in the golden Russian era. I'll try not to get carried away too much since this video is going to be long enough as it is, but forgive me if I stay on Shade maybe a few seconds longer than necessary. Shade comes from a small town called Zlatust? I'm not exactly sure how to say it. And he became known for squeezing an impressive amount of movement juice out of even the simplest of spots. His videos were shared for his insane creativity and style. Looking back, I think Shade did a great job showing a side of Russian parkour that most hype edits missed. What I'm talking about is the fun, adventure, love for life, and laughs that are at the heart of a good parkour session. But also, the intense physical training that is required to move at his level. A Shade video always makes me excited to play and motivated to work hard, which is why I still go back to his channel now and replay his videos from the golden Russian era to get motivated before I go out to train. By the way, the connecting move you're seeing Shade do right now is part of my vault pack Funk It Up. If you ever feel like you don't know how to transition from one of your moves to the next one in an interesting way, or you just like the idea of exploring all the different ways your body can move, then I think you would love Funk It Up. Inside you will get 50 in-depth tutorials, which will walk you through the technique and give you pointers on the most common mistakes. At the very end, I'm going to show you how to make each move look great. These are 50 moves that I personally love, and a lot of them were inspired by this era of parkour. The moves range from beginner friendly to pretty advanced, so there's something in there for everybody. And all you need to learn them is some walls, or if you're going to a gym, a simple vault box. If you're curious, right now you can get access to the first move for free, the Zulu vault. All you need to do is click the link in the description or the top comment and sign up for the newsletter. That way you can start learning today, and if you like it, you'll know where to find more. And now, back to the video. Bite. Bitek is a character you can say a lot about.
Meet me at the ice cream truck.
We'll get to that. Let's start with the parkour. Bite was known for his high-level bar work and loved using moves and body parts in unconventional ways. He's one of those athletes who could wear a mask and you could recognize him by his style alone. And he actually starred in a blindfolded parkour video, which was an absolute banger, and saw him do some crazy action wearing this blindfold. I mean, I'm assuming you could probably see right through the thing, but still impressive. Raw and rough around the edges with a high send-it factor is how I would describe his moves. And that's also why he was loved by old and new school parkour athletes alike, which was a hard thing to do at the time if you were a Russian parkour athlete. His signature move was definitely the dive roll. It seems like Bite was obsessed to take this move to heights nobody dared to before, or even imagined possible. Bite's signature dive rolls definitely started a trend in the Russian parkour community, who seemed to always want to one-up each other, and we got to see some impressive urban cliff diving. Beyond the moves, Bite is so memorable because of his humor. He had a number of edits with his signature weird humor that will not play out well in this iceberg format. But I recommend you check it out. Some of them don't even have any parkour at all. In fact, his most popular video with over 600,000 views is him and his friends stripping down naked, rubbing baby all over themselves and licking ice cream. I'm not going to dive into this. Let's move on to Hard Tricks Time. Hard Tricks Time is an iconic video uploaded to Erik's channel, which features him and his friends busting out, you guessed it, hard tricks. Sounds like any other video I talked about so far? Well, kind of. But what made this one special is how casual and consistently they pulled off these tricks in tandem. It really was, not just about them doing these new tricks, but how they did them. It made it look so casual. If you watched other athletes in this time, they usually needed to hype themselves up before a double flip, or get in the right zone, or have just the perfect spot, and it was a rare occurrence. And this video really marks the moment in parkour history when doubles became just another trick, the new standard. Sheva. I'm sorry, Sheva, but I'm gonna start this segment with your most viral clip ever. Sheva is the standout female athlete in Russian parkour. If you Google her full name, Alexandra Shevchenko, you'll quickly discover her origin story as an elite gymnast. A few years after Sheva quit gymnastics, she was looking for work. Because of that, she happened to walk into an acrobatics and parkour gym one day, wanting to work as a coach, but was quickly met with Erik Mukhametshin, who put her to the test. Erik quickly caught on that Sheva was really good at moving. And because back then it was so rare to see girls do parkour, that was super exciting to him, and he asked her to do trick after trick after trick and was amazed by how quickly she was picking up parkour. And obviously, Sheva enjoyed it herself as well. Sheva started parkour and she did get the job at the gym, but she actually quit it after just a few months because she wanted to focus on just training parkour. She had fallen in love with the sport because it shared a lot of similarities with gymnastics, but didn't have the competitive pressure and offered her a lot more freedom. Soon Sheva became a key figure in the international parkour scene, known for her incredible skills and the love for parkour she radiated in every clip she put out. Funny enough, Sheva did find her way back into the competitive world of parkour, where she found incredible success internationally, and she still competes today. Cherepko Seaman, the man with the most unfortunate last name in parkour. You know how in martial arts movies the characters always have a signature power? Iron Fist, Tiger Claw, the Cobra, Drunken Master, and so on. Well, Cherepko would definitely go by Iron Legs. Seriously, even Go-Go Gadget would be jealous of his jumping strength. The way Cherepko bounced from one trick into the next one was something the parkour world had never seen before. He was able to chain tricks on another level, and also used his strength to combine moves in unusual ways. So he was not just a powerhouse, but also pretty creative. Where other people would be done with their combo, Cherepko would add another 3, 4, 5 tricks to the end and just keep going. And style? Yeah man, his power just added a floatiness to all of his moves, which was magical to look at. Cherepko really was the full package, and still, I don't know if anybody has really been able to match his bounciness. It's out of this world. The world's highest wallflip. During this time, the Guinness World Records seemed to be obsessed with parkour. Every other week, they would come up with a new, strange record for parkour athletes to break, usually going up against each other head to head. And this resulted in Erik being invited to China for yet another Guinness World Record show, in which they had him battle a Chinese local for the world's highest wallflip. And this must be my favorite of all the Guinness World Records, which is not saying much because I'm not that excited about them, but seeing the world's highest wallflip, especially performed over a, what is it, just call this a stick, is pretty badass. And as a result, Erik took home the world's highest wallflip with this insane performance, which, yeah, I gotta hand it to Guinness World Records, was pretty epic, and we would have never been able to see this without them. Tier 3. In this tier, we are going to focus on athletes and events you would have only heard of if you were deep in the parkour community at this time. Lowkick, aka Alexander Savchuk, was an absolute unit of a human being. I mean, this guy was sort of a parkour monk with unreal perfectionism in everything he did. Just look at his body. Holy shit. I dream of looking like this one day. As you can expect, his tricks were hard as, especially for the time and even for Russian standards. Yet still, his technique was immaculate. Ivan has this really rare combination of clean execution you would expect usually from a gymnast, but all the style you like to see from a dancer, and for some reason it's really hard to have both at the same time. And a big reason of why Savchuk was able to have both is probably because of his background in breakdancing. You could tell Ivan was conscious of the fact that you can make a simple normal move extra special by adding a bit of flavor to it. And on top of that, he brought a lot of the breakdance moves into the parkour world, which was completely unheard of at this time. He even did this before Oleg Cricket put out his out of time edit. All these factors combined make his style instantly recognizable even today. And I want to talk about him more just so I can show you more of his clips, but I have to admit I don't know much about the guy. The double layout incident. What you're watching right now is a clip that shook the parkour world to the core. The way this clip starts out makes it feel like you're not going to see anything crazy. It's shaky, there's a finger in front of the lens, and then the athlete performs a sloppy first jump. Just makes you feel like, where's this gonna go? I'm gonna turn off the video right now. But then the protagonist stands at the edge of the Moscow bridge spot. A part of the spot nobody ever uses because it's just a straight 7-meter drop to grass. And then, to everybody's surprise, we witness the world's first double layout. I mean, it's still a trick that we rarely see outside today. 10 years later, even with all the crazy progress we've seen in parkour, a double layout on grass, it doesn't happen. Nobody does it. And the reason is because you need to go insanely high to make it all the way around, to make the rotation. It's super scary, and it's just not healthy. It's not good for you. The impact your body is going to experience if you do this trick is unbelievably heavy. And apparently the guy's footprints, the imprints in the grass, are still visible today. So, who is this mysterious Russian who did the world's first double layout? Arhangel, or today he goes by Volvan Blogger. And you might recognize this name because, well, I mentioned him in Tier 1. Do you remember the YouTube channel Parkour Klan? Arhangel is the man behind it all and was well known within the Russian community, but not really outside of Russia. And that's because the Russian parkour community largely lives on VK, which is the Russian version of Facebook. Arhangel was the businessman behind Parkour Klan who collected and shared clips from all of Russia, and he even built an online shop selling merch on the back of it. Researching this video, I was actually surprised to find out that Arhangel is actually the person behind a bunch of crazy stunts, who I thought were all separate crazy Russians. No, all of these clips are the same guy, and he pretty much embodies the crazy Russian spirit from all I can tell. In this clip, filmed on a potato, Volvan jumps off of a 13-meter building. At least he claims that in the video title. Which means you're probably thinking what all of us were thinking back then. There's no way his body is gonna allow him to keep going like this for much longer. But here's a clip of Volvan 10 years later, and he's looking good. I don't know how he feels, but that's impressive. Zyulev. Zyulev was another standout Russian athlete who brought a unique flavor to the table. Across the board, his skills were really difficult, stylish, and creative. But for the length of this video, I'll have to focus on the standout moments, of course. When I think of Zyulev, I think of dive kongs. He loves a big ass dive into a Kong, and we saw him integrate this skill into some cool combos like this running gainer pre to dive Kong. We also just saw him do this trick at a ridiculous scale. He then progressed to doing one-handed Kongs and was the first to ever do one-handed double Kongs. Nobody does these anymore, even though they look super gangster. Zyulev also injected some breakdancing moves into his flows, which was always a nice contrast to his big jumps. Talk about variety. Lastly, Zyulev invented this hook kick to front flip, which is still a rare trick and incredibly beautiful. It's pretty hard to get the angle for the rotation right on this one, which is why I think it hasn't gotten more popular, but I would love to see this move make a comeback. Crazy snow flips. To this day, winter is a bit of a sad time for me, because doing parkour in the cold, especially the rain, is hard to enjoy. However, during the golden era of Russian parkour, I had one thing to look forward to every winter season. Because as soon as snowfall hit Russia, it came with a shower of epic Russian training clips. Whatever new trick had been invented during the summer season, it was a given that as soon as the snow had piled up high enough, somewhere, some crazy Russian would double or even triple that trick. We even had a saying that if you come up with a new trick, somewhere, some Russian already doubled it. Of course, their technique was mostly sketchy, and you could tell that the good old philosophy of if you don't make the trick, you just gotta go from one story higher was pushed to its absolute limits. Now I gotta give the Russian parkour community some mad props. I was feeling bad for the weather I had to endure in Germany. And meanwhile in Russia, you had to put on multiple layers of clothing, spend an hour making a pile of snow, and then train tricks in sub-zero temperatures. You had to really love doing parkour to go through that, and you sure made me feel like a pussy every winter and motivated me to go train no matter what the conditions were. TracersRU. TracersRU was the first ever parkour team to come out of Russia and was founded by yet another Oleg. This Oleg did parkour himself, but instead of putting himself in front of the camera, he decided to instead go behind the camera and make the best possible video projects featuring his friends. Because of that decision, TracersRU came out of the gate with parkour films that had next level production value. The filmmaking in these videos might not seem impressive today, but remember that back then everybody was still shooting their videos on their dad's old camcorder with a $10 fisheye adapter. Meanwhile, the TracersRU videos had legit access to locations. Whether that access was legal or illegal is a different story. Beautiful filmmaking, creative concepts, and they even filmed this masterpiece of an edit of Byte doing parkour in a blindfold that culminated in this shot, which was clearly done with wire work. And some of these videos came out before there even was a YouTube. It was so ahead of its time. I reached out to Oleg to find out if he had a background in filmmaking, because otherwise this insane production value was just not imaginable for me. But he said he did not. He was simply in search of perfection, despite not having expensive equipment. He never wanted the audience to feel the camera. So for years, he only worked with static tripod shots until he could eventually afford a Steadicam and a camera crane. It's so crazy to me that one of their videos starts with Jared Leto giving them a shout out.
I'll make it loud and I'll go close. Can you hear? And you are watching Tracer's new video on TracersRU.
Most of us in the parkour world that day had just heard about parkour, and these guys were getting some crazy gigs at the time. It just seemed unreal. Still feels unreal today. The ending jump of the Asia edit is an insane downwards arm jump, which since became legendary in the Tokyo parkour community. I mean, I'm gonna stop talking about this in a second, but just look at every shot and how thoughtfully it is framed. TracersRU films are still beautiful to look at today and are truly timeless, not just because of their filmmaking, but of course also because of the action. One of their oldest videos was shot in a car park, and my mind was blown when I watched it, because it features this stunt. And the crazy thing is that I perform exactly the same stunt in my most viral video ever, Last Call for Mr. Paul. And I felt like I came up with that trick when we shot that video. But clearly, TracersRU had that idea way before me. And then that seed was planted in my brain just to surface 15 years later while shooting this airport video. Stas. If you do parkour for long enough, you're gonna run into the type of parkour person who love doing fantasy parkour. What I'm talking about is you're training at the spot and they're gonna look around and find the most disgusting, uncomfortable challenge or trick you could do at this spot and then suggest it to you with a cheeky smile. But when it comes to actually doing that trick, they're all talk and no action. Yet they still act like they deserve credit for coming up with the idea. And well, Stas, he's the exact opposite of that, because he'll suggest the craziest trick to you. You have a laugh because you think it's a joke, and then he keeps looking at you and you realize this guy is serious and he's about to do it. And this might make you think Stas is crazy, but actually the opposite is true. Maybe. At least there's evidence to suggest that he's quite logical, because Stas has a degree in chemistry, and if you ever train with him, you'll realize that he has quite the scientific approach to how he breaks down moves and approaches even the riskiest tricks in a very safe manner. I mean, everything's relative, right? And if you've made it so far, you've now collected all three legendary Latvian freerunners, which was Oleg Cricket and Pasha the Boss from Tier 1, and Stas in, I forgot what tier we're in, but Stas and Pasha were basically best friends and they were a deadly combo. Sorry, that sounded wrong. What I'm meaning to say is they push each other to new heights and are still incredibly fun to watch together to this day. Tier 4. Now we're moving more into the stories and people that you easily could have missed, but were all pretty epic. Pavel Kashin. This one is pretty hard to talk about, and I thought about maybe just leaving it out altogether because it's a pretty heavy topic. Pavel was a well-respected athlete in the Russian parkour community who unfortunately passed after doing a backflip on the edge of a rooftop and losing his balance. Incidents like this are incredibly rare in parkour, so this was a shock to the parkour community even outside of Russia. Of course, with the amount of sketchiness on display in this iceberg video, it's easy to say that it was just a matter of time until somebody gets seriously hurt. But as you can see, Pavel's movement was controlled and anything but sketchy. He was not a daredevil who was blindly risking his life. Pavel Kashin was a spectacular athlete who got incredibly unlucky and is forever remembered as a core piece of the Russian parkour community. Rest in peace. Parkour City and Parkour Week. Parkour City was probably the most organized group in the Russian parkour world. And if you know anything about parkour people, we're not known to be organized. So anybody who can bring a little bit of structure into our world is greatly appreciated. As an organization, Parkour City was known to put on parkour events, and they introduced the discipline to thousands of people with their in-person workshop. They regularly traveled the country, brought along popular athletes, and hosted events along the way. From what I can tell, their focus was really in communicating and teaching the benefits you get from training parkour, how you get physically and mentally stronger and can do so in a sustainable way. But that doesn't mean they were boring. one of the coolest events they put on was in the city of Voronezh, which has some of the best rooftops you can imagine. The locals put together a parkour walk for all the participants, which lasted for over an hour and took everybody along what you could call an urban hike with different routes of varying difficulty. This sounds so fun, I wish I could have been there for it. Parkour City's biggest event by far though was their yearly Parkour Week, which was held in St. Petersburg. Russia being the largest country in the world, even getting to this event was an adventure for many. Hundreds of athletes would often travel multiple days on trains just to be there for Parkour Week, which was effectively the yearly meetup for all of Russia's parkour community. And therefore, your chance to meet the biggest names in the world of Russian parkour. Vlad Erovikov. One of the faces you would have seen at Parkour Week would have been Vlad Erovikov, aka Blade. I cannot emphasize enough how underrated Vlad is. After Shade, he's gotta be my second favorite Russian freerunner. First of all, massive jumps. I mean, the size on his arm jumps and running jumps is just insane. Sure, Vlad is a short dude, so his jumps just look much bigger than they actually are, but you cannot deny that his airtime is unreal. He reminds me of a flying squirrel. The jumps and tricks you see Vlad hit require incredible strength and huge trust in your abilities. And of course, style. Man, it's hard to put my finger on why I love Vlad's style so much. To me, watching him move is like watching a tiger move. There's something so animalistic and natural about it. It's beautiful without trying hard to be beautiful. The true definition of form follows function. You can tell his movement was not forged in a gym by an instructor trying to follow some sort of ideal he was trying to squeeze him into. Instead, his movement is the product of endless hours spent moving and naturally exploring the way your individual body is made to move. I get a bit philosophical about this kind of stuff, but to me, Vlad's parkour is simply put a piece of art. 3W-Gen, which actually means Evgen, which is short for Evgeny. And all Evgeny ever really did was upload a 45-second video that featured these two insane height drops. They're forever burned into my memory. He then transitioned into stunts. Evgeny then made very rare appearances in other athletes' videos and completely disappeared from our radar, until he returned but transformed into what looks like an anime character. Evgeny had partnered with a rat, yes, and developed a signature style of stick parkour, which would look at home in any 90s martial arts movie. This shit is so cool, and I feel like his story deserves a movie of its own. Well, actually, maybe the rat should get the movie, and it's a Ratatouille Part 2, but with parkour. Bad Motherfucker and Hardcore Henry. Now here's an interesting side story. The guy who filmed that video of Evgeny doing parkour with his rat and his stick is called Vugi. And he's a character that came from the very early days of parkour in Russia. Vugi looks like the nerd from high school who can't do a pull-up, but he has some legit parkour skills. And what's even more legit are his filmmaking skills. At the time, GoPros were still pretty new, and most people mounted them either on their head or their chest because that's the mount that the GoPro came with. But it didn't really look good for parkour. The action didn't translate or the shots were just too shaky. Vugi figured out that the best place for the GoPro is right in front of the athlete's mouth. And a lot of athletes in Russia actually put the literal GoPro into their mouth to shoot parkour. Not Vugi though, he built an extra helmet just to shoot GoPro POV action. And with the helmet and the camera in front of the mouth, it just gives you a natural looking perspective that really showcases the action perfectly without obstructing the field of view of the athlete too much. Through the process of creating this helmet and experimenting with filmmaking, Vugi got involved in the making of the music video Bad Motherfucker, which featured crazy stunts and parkour filmed from a perspective we had never seen before. The video is now sitting comfortably at 47 million views on YouTube, But Vuki told me that's not even the original upload, and the video has millions of views across various platforms, including Facebook and VK, so it's probably at hundreds of millions of views in total. And that was not the end. This hit music video directly led to the making of the movie Hardcore Henry, which took that concept and expanded it to a full-length movie. If you haven't seen it, definitely strap in for a wild ride. It's a firework of action, creative stunts, and incredible fight scenes. To me, it's very cool to see how parkour and Vuki were a big part of this creative masterpiece. The biggest roof gap ever, maybe, I'm not sure. But this roof gap made it onto Russian national television, and the story behind it is pretty hilarious. The athletes hitting the gap are Evgeny, who we talked about a minute ago, and Erik, who is never far away when there's epic action to be had. I'll let Erik tell the story behind this jump in his own words because he actually went on the air about it.
We were in a taxi, driving past that place, and he goes, "Look, we can jump there." And I just turned around and I said, "Yeah." And he's like, "All right, let's do it." And I thought he was joking. I didn't really look at it properly. I was like, "Yeah, let's do it."
Okay.
And he goes, like, he thought for a few minutes, like, properly, and he goes, "Right, we need to find keys and stuff like that." So I realized that he was serious. I was like, "You actually want to jump there?" He's like, "Yeah."
Really wants
I was
to
like,
jump
"All right." So the same day we went there, we had to open the door, which works like that in Russia. You just take the door and you just pull it as hard as
Russian
you can.
keys.
Yeah, you don't need the keys. So we went up. We saw the gap. It was really high.
The height difference
The
is
height difference was huge, yeah. So we're like, all right, we definitely need some mats, otherwise we both will die because it's concrete. So we ask a guy if he can get some mats on top of there, and he goes, "We can bring some news if you want. I guess you can do it. We don't really care."
What?
The roof that we were jumping from was open,
Yeah.
but the other roof was shut. So we had to come there with like clippers, so I don't really know what you call that.
Yeah, like lock
clip
cutters.
the lock.
No way. to get down once you land.
I was in a really good shape. So back then I was training like 12 hours a day sometimes, but like working out like 1 to 2 hours a day, and then just like flipping non-stop or like jumping around the city and stuff like that. Those news guys, they were there and they were just asking us, "Are you ready to die?" And I was like, "Yo, dude, you're standing with me on the roof,
why are you
asking me
asking
if
that?
I'm ready to die? Are you ready to die? I'll push you off right
Exactly.
now." I was
You
so
bastard.
pissed. I was really angry, like super
Yeah.
angry. So yeah, and then I went and jumped. But then you know what's bad? You see those mats, right? It seems like it's super soft and stuff like that. It wasn't.
Wait, how thick are the mats?
Like this thing. Two of those, bro. Two of those. And they're super soft. They're super squishy. And then so I landed. And the amount of impact I got, I was like, "Oh my god." And then my friend was asking, "How was it?" And I couldn't, because they were filming it. I couldn't say, "Yo." I never got as much impact as I just did now. I was like, "All right." You know, I was just like, "Oh my god, how can I tell him that that was fucked up?" You know what happened? I was working out, I was super strong. My legs, my arms were super strong. But after that jump, I got so much impact that my arms, I couldn't lift a bottle because I was super tired. So I got really tense. Like, it's crazy.
So you couldn't tell your friend the truth.
Yeah.
So you're like, "It's good."
Yeah. And then he jumped and almost died. That was so upsetting, bro. He almost died.
What happened with his? What went wrong?
You see what I did? You can see how like unstable I was flying
Yeah,
down.
yeah.
But because I knew if I jump up and then like bring my knees towards me, I'll just die, because I would jump up and then go straight down. The distance wasn't that big, so I was like, "Oh, I'll just step down." So I literally just stepped down like that. Like I
Wow,
pushed
but then
myself
you do
forward.
this, yeah.
Yeah, because I
slow it
literally
down.
brought my chest super forward. You know what I mean?
Oh my
But then I
God.
had energy to go into the roll, so I was fine. But he didn't. Because he jumped up and he went down, bangs, and he didn't do any rolls. He just went and just died, hit himself, and he bounced up on concrete, bro. Like, I thought, "Oh my god, he's dead. Like, he's not gonna survive this jump."
What happened to him?
He was kind of fine, but his knee was fucked for like 2 weeks or something.
Only 2 weeks is pretty good for that, dude.
Yeah, I know. I thought he was dead.
That's crazy. He basically bounced off concrete like a trampoline.
Yeah.
But it was concrete.
Yeah.
Tier 5, and you're still here, which means you're in for a treat, because now we are really getting into the weeds with athletes and stories you probably never heard about. UNONA was a regular parkour event which was kind of made fun of in Western Europe, and that's because of how many crash mats were on the course. To us, a competition was kind of the place where you go to prove your skills and show them on hard ground. Crash mats are meant for practice, for the competition. You don't bring the crash mats to the competition. But not in Russia. And I think it sort of makes sense because they flew in some pretty sketchy people and it was probably best to have crash mats there just to make sure nobody gets hurt. Either way, the action coming out of these contests was always insane and full of sketchy moments. As already mentioned, there's this competitive culture in Russian parkour in general where people are trying to one-up each other, and we're better for that to come out in a literal competition. Everybody wants to prove that they can keep up, and yeah, it gets pretty insane. They also had this weird but awesome side act where they had parkour athletes go up onto a huge roof and then asked them to perform tricks onto a massive pile of crash mats. This was not part of the contest, this was just kind of a showcase and for fun. Luckily, the organizers of the event were smart enough to make this part of the event exclusive, meaning people known to be sketchy were not allowed to join the rooftop session. IGELS Club. IGELS is a parkour and acrobatics gym in St. Petersburg, which is still operating today. And if you remember Sheva from Tier 2, this is where she met Erik and started her parkour career. IGELS has been a key training ground for many Russian parkour athletes, giving them a place to go during the hard Russian winters. With so many masters gathering in one place for an extended period of time, also the gym having a great setup and a foam pit access, it is no surprise that IGELS became somewhat of a creative laboratory for the Russian parkour community. Wait, I said that Russia was already a creative lab. So this is like the extra experimental part of the lab. You know how Google has their moonshot projects where they just try crazy stuff? Well, this is like the Russian version of that, I guess. You can find many videos of these experimental training sessions, and a lot of rare moves came out of these training times. Training times? That's not a real word. I just didn't want to say sessions again. If watching this gets you excited to experiment yourself, that is a strong sign you would enjoy my course, Funk It Up. The 50 moves you're going to learn are sort of alternative, meaning they use parts of your body that you usually wouldn't with the basic parkour moves. And they also use movement patterns that I found from other sports like capoeira or dance. This means you then basically have a whole new set of toys that you can use to experiment and explore whole new worlds of movement. And because I know that this playful, explorative, and creative type of training is not necessarily natural for everybody, this course comes with a bonus mini course. In this theory lesson, I explain how I managed to take the pressure away from being creative, and how I structure a training session to allow for a lot of ideas to naturally come to me. Then I give you 3 different exercises you can use to create new ideas. Equipped with my 50 moves and the creative framework, I believe you'll be surprised how many interesting moves you can come up with, even at the most boring spots. And I believe that because it definitely worked for me. So if you want to add some extra fun to your sessions right now, click the link in the description or the top comment and get Funk It Up in your life. Enjoy. Alexei Popov. This section is probably going to be a little bit short because Alexei never made that many videos. And even though Alexei was in videos like Hard Tricks Time, where he helped make double flips the new standard, I never really knew his name up until much later. And that's because Alexei got a bunch of face tats and dramatically changed his parkour style. All of a sudden, he clearly stood out from the sea of other good Russians with his unique spins and flips. As far as I know, he was one of the first people to embrace this off-axis style that is quite popular today. And if you made it this far and you don't know, flipping off-axis means you're not flipping straight over your head. Instead, you're kind of throwing yourself in the air and twisting or flipping on an axis that is not vertical or horizontal. To this day, looking at these clips, I have a hard time naming any of these tricks. And even if I was going to try to name them, it might just be like 360 while grabbing your knee. It's really not the trick, it's how he does them that makes it so cool. Zelim. Zelim is pretty underground. Even I had never heard of him until he made a submission for the Red Bull Art of Motion, which is the most prestigious parkour contest in the world. Every year, Red Bull would give away a few spots in the contest, including a free flight and hotel to the athletes who sent in an online submission. Zelim was practically unknown before his submission, but this 1-minute compilation put him on the map and got him a ticket to the event, which he did not perform too well at, but that's beside the point. You see, there are a lot of people who move with style these days and put together flow lines and interesting combinations, but all those elements really only start shining when you bring a certain intensity and a bit of a send it factor to the table. And man, Zelim does bring the fire when he needs to and combines it with all the other stuff that make parkour so juicy. This is Avi. Avi, or Accelerated Vision, was sort of a hype parkour team that you would see quite frequently during this era. A bunch of people would come together to make these big compilation edits, and usually every member on the team had their signature skill they would excel at. Avi sure had some dope moments, but the member I want to focus on is Alexei Sevin, because he practiced a parkour style that is pretty much extinct in today's landscape. Alexei was the handstand guy. Well, that means should be pretty obvious looking at his clips. I'm not sure if I'm happy or sad this style is out of fashion. There's something about it that's so surprising and fun to watch. But on the other hand, it's a bit gimmicky and tends to look silly when pushed to its extremes. And this is coming from somebody who is really getting into handstands lately, but yeah, there's something about it that just looks a little bit strange. Fails. Obviously, there are plenty of fails and hilarious moments that were captured along the way. And a lot of those don't deserve a story themselves. But I also didn't want to leave them out. There's so many great ones. So here are just some of my favorites. Tier 6. Now we are really in the deep end, where I'm going to share the weirdest character in Russian parkour with you, some hidden gems of athletes, and a few other strange bits. Chernikov. Chernikov is the ultimate sketchy Russian. Watching his training clips, you feel like he almost dies 3 times during just his regular gym session. But somehow, Chernikov also has this sixth sense that just seems to kick in whenever he is close to self-destruction. Somehow he always magically managed to emerge unscathed, just barely. He's like that martial arts master who pretends to be stumbling through a fight and coincidentally takes out all the enemies in the process. If you look up the saying, walk it off in the Russian dictionary, you will see a picture of Chernikov.
Берешь и делаешь! Хуйня, надо выше брать.
Да, конечно, как всегда в его стиле.
It seems like Chernikov embraced his tendency of failing because he soon rebranded himself as a stuntman. I guess if the shoe fits, wear it, which gave him the excuse to get even more out of control. When the jumps became bigger and bigger, he eventually became too scared to commit to them. So he came up with a genius solution. He figured that if I light myself on fire, not jumping will be more scary than actually just doing the jump, which is both perfectly logical and absolutely insane at the same time. We know this was his motivation because Chernikov explained his method on national TV and was promptly called out by an actual stuntman who said this has nothing to do with proper stunt work. Kostya Kachurin. Imagine a samurai from feudal Japan, reborn in modern-day Russia, who starts parkour but only trains with minimal obstacles. And you have the ingredients for Kostya Kachurin, mostly known as Kostya. Kostya is a true master of flow and had a breakout video series where he mesmerized the parkour world with his beautiful moves. Him being barefoot for a lot of his clips added to the air of mastery he displayed, not just in his video style, but also his moves. I always imagined going training with Kostya would be like joining an exclusive martial arts school, and his training probably starts with either shaving your head completely or growing your hair out to a ponytail, but nothing in between. Next, Kostya's training would involve a series of mysterious training drills, one of which would be to spend a month in solitude in a Russian workout park without being allowed to ever touch the ground. After completing his methods, you would emerge a flow master yourself. underwear training. This is a weird topic. I'm not really sure why, but for some reason, Russian parkour athletes love to strip down to their underwear. I witnessed this myself at after parties, but this pattern also shows up during their normal training sessions. You often find random segments in Russian videos where they progress to feature more and more people being just in their underwear. I mean, it could be that less clothing makes it easier to land your tricks, or this could be a natural way for Russians to manage their temperature during Russian summer, which lasts approximately 7 days. I don't know. Further research into this topic is definitely needed. The kids. I felt like I needed a section talking about the incredibly talented kids on display in many of these videos. As with the grown-ups in this video, a lot of times their technique is sadly unhealthy and the impact they're taking is just quite troublesome, to say the least. But I also remember what it was like falling in love with parkour as a 14-year-old myself and how fun it was to push the limits. And these kids definitely did push them, further than I did. There's a healthy way to train parkour when you're young, and this is definitely not it. A lot of these clips make me flinch nowadays. At the same time, Russia is not necessarily known for the many healthy pastime activities that are offered to your average teenager. So getting into this style of parkour training might still be better than getting into drinking? And of course, the other side of the coin exists too. There are plenty of examples out there that are super wholesome and show young guys and girls getting into healthy parkour training and being introduced to moving their body creatively. Mainly, I wonder what happened to these kids. Did some of them actually get into parkour long term and still train today? What does their movement look like now? Or was this just a fun thing that they did in their neighborhood and then forgot about? Corruption. Parkour City, who we talked about earlier, secured some funding for the government to equip a gym with new parkour obstacles. Sadly, when those obstacles arrived, it was clear that they were just built to look good, but weren't actually safe to do parkour on. A lot of them started falling apart almost immediately. Evidently, someone had decided to save on the production and pocket the money. To call attention to the situation, Parkour City invited the local news stations and organized a training session in the slushy snow, to symbolize that training like this is just as dangerous as training on the obstacles that were provided to them. Over the years, I myself heard a story here and there about how bad corruption in Russia can get. For example, one of the local parkour guys wanted to build a parkour gym, and to get the permission for that, he didn't actually have to go to the government, he had to get permission from the local mafia. Obviously, for a sport that is so small and has so little resources, hearing stories like this is truly heartbreaking to me. And it makes it even more impressive to see the scale of events that the parkour community still managed to organize over the years. Arena combat. Parkour and martial arts is one of the craziest crossovers ever. This Russian fighting league decided it would be a great idea to do MMA with obstacles, and it's every bit as crazy as it sounds. The fights are usually 2 versus 2 and look like absolute mayhem. The obstacles add an extra element of strategy to the game, and players can get points by holding an obstacle for an extended period of time. And I guess it also kind of simulates what a real street fight could look like. Of course, there's usually not that much parkour involved in the end, and eventually most fights end up in a pretty standard MMA situation. I don't know too much about it, to be honest, but I thought it was worth mentioning for how strange this is. Crazy Jump 100. I'm really torn if I should include these in here or not, because Crazy Jump 100 is not even in Russia, and they were also not really connected to the greater Russian community because they were sort of doing their own little thing in their own bubble. But for some reason, if you talk to people who lived through this era of parkour, Crazy Jump 100 stuck in their memory. And I think the main reason for that is their ridiculous name. It just perfectly summed up the mentality while also sort of being lost in translation at the same time. Now, parkour movement-wise, Crazy Jump 100 did have some nice moments, especially with their bar work, but they were not really a big inspiration to the greater parkour community. However, one thing that made them unique was their focus on street shows. They came up with some really unique ways to show parkour in a street show setting, and they did not hold back with these tricks on concrete. Now, here's a bit of a weird theory I have. The leader of Crazy Jump 100 was this blonde dude, and he did a stunt for the local TV station. He did a backflip from 7 meters, and what's always a risk with these is hitting your head on the backwards roll. In fact, here's a clip of a guy getting knocked out doing exactly that. And in this case, our hero did not get knocked out, but obviously he hit his head, so the medics came over to check on him. But the TV host pulled him away from the medics. And then our athlete decided to prove that he is in good condition by performing a beautiful backflip. Now obviously this does not prove you didn't sustain a concussion, but this kind of caught on and became a thing. I remember many instances afterwards where people would do a ridiculous stunt and would then just add a backflip to the end of it to show that, haha, my knees are still okay, or I'm in one piece. I think this is where this started. I think this is the origin. Crazy Jump 100. I still just love saying that name. Wow, that was a lot. Of course, there are many more people who I wasn't able to mention even with the video being this long. I'm going to drop a few of those clips here while I wrap things up. And to be honest, I already feel bad because there are so many things that I feel like I kind of wanted to have in here, but then they didn't really fit in here, or maybe I got details of the story wrong. But at some point I have to wrap this thing up and move on. There's not a lot on this topic that I can really look up for reference or for research. I'm relying on a lot of stories that I've heard over the years, some of them second hand or maybe even third hand. I tried to cross-check a lot of this with my Russian friends, but yeah, it is what it is. Either way, I'm pretty happy to at least have a lot of this action and these clips in one place for people to reference. So if you want to dig deeper in any of these topics, then this is a great starting point at the very, very least. I'd love to hear what you thought about this type of iceberg video. It did take a lot of time and effort, obviously. I mean, it took that for you to watch it. Imagine what it took to make it. But if you guys are really into them, I could imagine doing more. For example, an iceberg on all the OG French tracers and how they connect, or the UK scene in the 2010s. Let me know in the comments if you would love to see more, and if yes, what kind of topic you would love to learn more about. And if this video got you excited to learn some new tricks, please check out my Vault tutorial package, Funk It Up. I took 50 funky moves that were very dear to me and made an in-depth tutorial for each, so you can add another layer of creativity and fun to your skill set. Most of these moves you won't find anywhere else, and you won't find a tutorial for them anywhere, which is well, I made them and put them all in one place. Think of it like buying spices for your kitchen. And of course, a lot of these tricks are directly or indirectly inspired by the legends featured in this Russian parkour iceberg. I recommend you start by getting the tutorial for the Zulu Vault, which I'm making accessible for you for free. All you need to do is click the link in the description under this video or the top comment. And that's it. Keep moving.